If you don't have easy access to gather branches for your snake's enclosure, they can be a pretty costly enrichment item to buy, and they also have the potential to mold and aren't always easy to disinfect. So if you're interested in an alternative that looks like a branch but is cheap, easy to clean, and fun to make, keep watching. And I'll show you how I went from this to this. Let's slither on into it. I live in the city, so it's not easy for me to go foraging for branches in the woods, and I've spent a lot of money on buying them from stores and expos. I definitely prefer a naturalistic look in my enclosures, but branches can also be a pain in the butt to clean. So I've used PVC for perches before because it's super cheap and easy to disinfect, but it's also fugly. So I decided to combine the best of both options into one by turning a PVC pipe into a branch. It was actually a fun little art project and doesn't require a ton of tools or investment. So let's review the short list of supplies you'll need, and I'll also put it in the description below for reference, and then we'll get to work and I'll walk you through it step by step so that you can try it yourself. So obviously you're going to need some PVC pipe, which you can find at any hardware store for under 10 bucks. It comes in a variety of sizes, and the perches I made for this video are a 1/2 inch in diameter. That size would work fine for a juvenile boa like Nymeria, but you might want to go with 3/4 or 1 inch for a ball python or an older, heavier bodied snake. To cut the PVC, you'll need something like this ratcheting pipe cutter, a bandsaw or a chop saw, or you could even use a handsaw as long as it has a fine-toothed blade. I like the pipe cutter for at least the first cut because it takes minimal effort to cut through the pipe without squishing it in the process and creates no mess. Next, you'll need a Dremel, or an attachment for a drill that can hold a mandrel with a cutoff wheel. Make sure you have a dust mask, safety glasses, and gloves. You'll need a heat gun, coarse and fine grit sandpaper, rags, a spray bottle, acrylic paint and brushes, and you'll need a clear sealant. It'll also be helpful to have a drill, some thin wire or string, and if possible, a vise, though there are workarounds if you don't have one of those. If you have an idea of where you want to place your perch, get a rough measurement first, but always use a longer piece than that measurement, since the bends you create are going to shorten its overall length. I did some tests with smaller pieces, and then I used a 5-foot piece without cutting it at all, since I wasn't exactly sure where it would end up. It might be hard to tell how you'll want to place it until you've actually finished shaping it. So I recommend you leave it as long as you can and then cut it down later. Better for it to be long than to end up with an unsightly and unnatural looking seam where you put two together. If you want to watch episodes ad-free, head over to Patreon to become a member. I think it costs about 19 bucks a month to remove ads on YouTube, but by supporting the channel on Patreon, you could watch without ads for much less. Get some other nice perks to boot, all while helping me continue to make content focused on animal welfare and mental health and well-being. If you're staying here, that's okay, but don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button before you go, as that's another way to help support the mission here. Using a cutoff wheel on your Dremel, start by carving lines into the pipe. I definitely recommend using a heavy-duty work glove on the hand holding the pipe, especially if you're not accustomed to using this tool. It's quite easy for the blade to slip off the rounded surface, which could be no good if you're not protected. It's going to throw very fine PVC dust everywhere, which is why I have plastic draped over my bench. So you'll definitely want to wear that dust mask and safety glasses. Expect to be covered in the stuff by the time you're done. You don't need to be precious about making your lines. Honestly, the less you control them, the more natural it will look. Just have fun with it. I do recommend cutting them on the deeper side though, because as you'll see later, it'll make the paint detailing look a lot more interesting. Ideally, you'll use a vise to clamp the end of the pipe in place while you do your bends. But if you don't have one, you can also just step on the end with your foot. You'll want to heat up a small section of the pipe at a time, and then slowly bend it as it becomes soft. Try to heat all the way around the section and don't use force to bend it, or you could end up sort of flattening the pipe. Once it's bent to your liking, hold it in place and spray the bent section with water to cool it down so it'll harden again. It'll take about 5 to 10 seconds before it'll hold the shape on its own, so make sure to wait until it's completely set. You can always go back and rework sections later if you want to alter the bend some more. It's okay if you burned your pipe a little bit. That won't be noticeable after the next steps. Next, use your coarse sandpaper over the entire surface. Not only do you want to get rid of the printed wording on the pipe, but you have to abrade the surface in order for the paint to adhere. Make sure you hit every inch of it, otherwise you'll have areas that don't take the paint. Then move on to the finer grit sandpaper to smooth out the finish. Make sure to use a wet rag to clean off the dust from the pipe before you start painting. You're going to be starting with the lighter color first, unlike when you're doing your backgrounds, where you normally start with the darker color. You'll see why in a moment. The first coat might not be very even, but just try to get as much coverage as you can. I experimented with wiping down the excess paint to kind of even out the first coat so there weren't obvious brush strokes. I tried painting a second coat pretty much right away, but found that it's better if you just let the first coat dry. I tried different types of brushes, and I think for the first coats, a regular fine hair paintbrush is best, or a sponge brush. You can see a few spots where I probably didn't sand well enough and the paint's not covering well, but as long as it's not too dramatic, it'll be fine. If no amount of painting seems to stick, you'll need to sand that spot again and repaint it. You'll probably want to do a second coat of this first color. It'll really help keep the white of the PVC from showing through. You can try dry brushing another color over top if you want some extra flavor to the finish. The more depth of color, the more organic it will look. Now the fun part. Take your darkest color and paint over the lighter color, making sure to use enough paint that it goes into all of the grooves you've carved. You'll want to go in stages with this because you need to use a rag to wipe off the excess paint before it dries. So just paint a few inches at a time, wipe, and then repeat. The goal is to leave a light wash over the first color while letting that dark color really settle into your carved details. This is why carving a little more deeply is a good thing, because it'll cause a more dramatic effect. On the first ones I made, I didn't carve very deeply, but I used a heavier hand on the last one, and I think it turned out much better. Notice that I have the end of the pipe slipped over a jig. Any spot that rests on a surface will either have damage to the color or get a bunch of dirt in the wet paint. It also makes it easier to rotate it as you work. I found that the heavier I did this last color, the better it looked. So take your time with it. It doesn't need to be perfect. From a distance, the imperfections will look more natural. The next part you'll want to do if you don't have a jig to stand the pipes on while they're drying. You can drill a very small hole in the end of your pipe and slip some string or wire through it so you can hang them. You definitely don't want to have any of the pipe touching a surface when the clear coat is applied. I used Eco Poly Finish and Sealer because it's one of the only truly non-toxic sealants on the market. You can use other types of clear coat as long as you let it cure for at least 2 weeks, but they all have higher VOC levels than Eco Poly. So I decided to go with something I felt confident would be safe wherever I put it. The directions suggested using lamb's wool pads, microfiber pads, or staining pads, and I tried all of them. The lamb's wool was a waste of money because although it's nice as a broad stroke applicator, it had stray hairs coming off of it, absorbed a lot of liquid, and I ended up feeling like I was wasting sealant and would need more coats. The staining pad also shed pieces and wasn't leaving a smooth finish. In the end, I actually liked using a cheap sponge brush the best. It took slightly longer, but I felt more in control. Just make sure you spin your branch as you work and smooth out any drips before they dry. If you're not using a jig, hang your piece up to dry and you can leave them hanging to apply your second coat. You'll definitely want a minimum of 2 coats, if not more, and give each one time to dry thoroughly in between. You'll know whether 2 coats have been sufficient by applying some water to the surface of your branch after the sealant's fully dried, and you should see the water bead up. But if you see the paint changing color and absorbing water, you'll need more coats of sealant. Once your finish work is done, it's time to decide how to attach the perch in your enclosure. This is just to show how you might measure. I would not be putting a perch this close to the UVB, and you should plan ahead to be sure it's appropriately distanced from heat sources, regardless of what sealant you used. If you want to cut the ends to be flush against the walls, you might need an angle finder in order to figure out your final cuts. Then you could simply pre-drill a hole in the ends of the perch and drill through them into your enclosure walls if they're wood or thick PVC. Another attachment option is to use spray foam to permanently install it into a background, in which case you won't need to be very precise with your end cuts. But if you're putting it into an enclosure that's already in use, you can't use this method unless you can move your snake to another temporary enclosure for the time it takes to cure, which could be a week or more. If you just want a removable branch that's not attached to anything, you'll probably want to cap the ends. You can buy caps for less than $1 and then sand them down and paint them to match the branch. Or just fill the ends with spray foam and paint it. Remember that with any kind of foam, caulk, paint, or sealant, you'll want at least a week or 2 for it to cure and off-gas before exposing your snake to it. So I really wanted to have one of these installed by the time I release this video, but I'm just not quite ready to place them yet. So you'll just have to watch for the follow-up video to see how they look in place. That means don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss that. I'm pretty excited about the build I'm working on at the moment, and it will have at least one of these branches, plus a similar but more elaborate version of this project. Snake therapy isn't just about physical interactions with our animals. It encompasses the wide variety of positive experiences that come with keeping them as pets. And for me, that most certainly includes putting time and creativity into increasing their quality of life and sharing it with you. Don't forget to give the video a like and add a comment below if you enjoyed it. Those little actions really do help the channel out. And I also just love hearing from you. If you've done anything like this that you'd like to share, join the Discord channel and post some pictures, get some feedback, or just generally enjoy yourself. It's a fantastic group of folks so far, and I bet you'll just make it better. I'm Shira, and this is Nymeria, and we'll see you next time for more snake therapy.